It is a little after 3 o'clock, and this is our strategic conversations for fall and winter agritourism operators. And it's hosted by North Carolina Cooperative Extension. We have about 35 people registered this afternoon, and I think there was some challenge in getting to the right link, so we're going to give folks a few more minutes to join us. I am Lee Guth, and I am the Cooperative Extension Director in Pitt County. I am delighted to have all of you join us. This kind of started from our end because we had a local operator who wanted to try to talk through some of the big decisions they had to make. And we felt like this would be a good opportunity to bring folks together. So again, as people start joining us, I'm not sure how many people have used Zoom before, if this may be new to you. And I want to give you a couple of pointers on how to operate Zoom so you'll feel comfortable. First off, I want to ask you a question. Is this the first time you've ever used Zoom? And the way I want you to tell me is by taking your cursor and going down to the bottom of your screen, under my face. And you should have, over on the right, a little smiley face that says reaction. So if you can click on that, you can give me a thumbs up if this is your first time using Zoom. Excellent, Chris Stokes, terrific. Who else? Leslie, good, good. All right, a lot of you all are pros at this, and that's terrific. So the next thing I want to show you is, if again, under my face, if you go down to the little button that says chat with a little conversation bubble. If you click on that, it's going to open a screen on the left of me, on your right, and down at the bottom it says to everyone, and you can type in a message there. So if you have a question today, type it right there. You can direct it to everyone, or you can direct it to a specific person. And if you look above that where it says chat, there is already a message there for you. And that is a link to our Google document where we have today's agenda. So you should be able to get to it there. We do have everybody on mute, so when it is somebody's turn to talk, I will unmute them so they can speak. If you are joining us by phone, *6 mutes and unmutes you, and you raise your hand by doing *9. Again, back in the search in the chat box, you should be able to raise your hand if you need to ask a question. So the last thing I want to tell you about Zoom is, if for any reason we are interrupted today by someone that we did not invite, and it does happen occasionally, I will shut the Zoom down as quickly as possible, and I'll reconnect with you all by email a few minutes later. Hopefully with our security protocols, that will not happen. That's about all I know to tell you about Zoom. So we have 19 of our participants here, and we do have a tight schedule, so I'm going to try to go ahead and get us started. Again, my name is Lee Guth, and I'm the Cooperative Extension Director here in Pitt County in Greenville, North Carolina. I want to welcome you to this Extension Zoom conference. I've got several talented Extension colleagues with me today to try to talk about some critical decisions that we need to make around fall and winter tourism and agritourism. As we get started, I just want to remind you that this is a fluid situation. There are no cut and dried answers often, and the recommendations change as we learn more. And the way we learn more is by watching what COVID does over a period of time. So we have to go into our discussion understanding that and being willing to try to work with a difficult and changing atmosphere. As of yesterday, the governor came out with a new executive order, number 163, that'll go into effect Friday. And that has increased the number of people that can gather indoors to 25 and the number outside to 50 using the 3 W's. And I hope everybody knows those by now. Wearing a face covering, waiting at least 6 feet apart, and washing your hands. So as we go into that, be thinking about that. And Chris has already asked us a question: where does agritourism fall with the COVID guidelines for our fall events? So Chris, we're going to have Becky Bowen talk a little bit more about that, but it is our understanding that you're going to be able to operate with precautions like following the 3 W's. The most recent thing that the governor sent out with 163 says that playgrounds will be open now, and many of you have those incorporated into your operations. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with our agenda. Our Extension colleague, Andrew Brannon, is an attorney that works with Extension, and he could not join us at the last minute until the very end. So I'm going to ask another attorney, Becky Bowen, who is on staff with Extension, to talk to us a little bit about liability with COVID. And again, as you have questions on what she says, put those in the chat box, and we will have time at the end to discuss questions that you have. And on the agenda, just so you know, I've got everybody's name and how to find them. So Becky Bowen, there's a link to her, and you'll be able to reach those people later on. So I'm going to turn it over to Becky.
Great, thank you, Lee. And I have an immediate disclaimer. Andrew Brannon is the one who usually gives not technically legal advice, but legal education with respect to these matters. So please don't take anything that I say today or anything that he says on his video clip, which I'm about to play for you, as legal advice. So I'm going to switch right now and show Andrew's video clip where he talks about sort of the general concept of liability, which means you're responsible for any damages suffered by another person who comes on your property, generally what that means, and then how it relates to COVID-19. So, of course, it didn't pull up here. Let's see, I want to share computer sound. Optimize screen sharing, and let's find it. Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. Let me know if you can't hear it.
Situation related to COVID-19. A question right now among agritourism operators is, can they safely operate in this environment that we're in right now? And as businesses, there are now regulations about how businesses operate in the realm of COVID-19, coronavirus, whatever we're going to call it, and the businesses have to comply with that. I mean, its enforcement has been somewhat spotty. There's been more citizen shaming and all that, but this takes it to a little bit different level when you're operating a business and you're having people come to your business and come into contact with you, your employees, and with one another. So let's look at the executive orders briefly. Let's consider these to be regulations. Governor Cooper's executive order number 147. What Governor Cooper and his people are doing here are requiring that certain types of businesses where employees are in close proximity to one another have to do social distancing and wear face coverings, and they're required to do that as by operating. You're regulated to have to do that. Your employees have to do that in order for you to operate. Well, here we have, and again, I think the probably the idea behind this is that we have farm labor crews, migrant and H-2A that are working in close proximity. They're living in close proximity, and perhaps in housing supplied by the farm operator. And so that maybe we're thinking of it in that light. But notice here that the executive order refers to NAICS 1152, which is agriculture. So if you're employing people in agriculture, you have to have social distancing and wearing face masks. Well, so an immediate question arises, and this is really more of a logic exercise, is, well, does that include agritourism farms? These aren't migrant operations where you have a lot of workers picking vegetables, or you have H-2A workers picking vegetables or doing other tasks on the farm. And so the answer is that we don't know if an agritourism operation, which so often needs to be classified as a farm, as you'll see for zoning purposes, whether an agritourism operation is agriculture under NAICS 1152. Well, just in a situation where something's happened, either side's going to be bringing forward their evidence for persuasion. And this is one that I would bring forward to say that, yes, agritourism is recognized as agriculture, and the employees of that operation were required to have face masks and do social distancing. And I do that here just by pointing out that on the ag census, if I can enlarge this just a tad, the ag census, agritourism revenue is specifically requested in terms of, how much income did you get from farm-related sources. So to me, that's evidence that agritourism is considered to be agriculture. Does that tie it directly to NAICS 1152? No. Could that leap of logic be made? Perhaps. As later in this discussion, you'll see where farm agritourism revenue becomes very, very important to the classification of that farm for zoning purposes. So, let's move forward a little bit in this COVID-19 scenario. So here are our basic phase 2 restrictions, and each agritourism operator has to really make their own decision on, can they safely operate, but also do they fall within these definitions. And I put a couple here that likely apply to an agritourism operation. Of course, might have an indoor farm stand that you've got to keep at 50% capacity. If you have a wedding venue, you have restrictions there. Day camps, maybe. Those are open with no restrictions, at least under phase 2. Playgrounds are closed. So if you have, play equipment on the farm as part of your agritourism operation, it's likely that stays off limits. I put a link here in the presentation just to illustrate what was done in Washington State. I'm not certain, I couldn't find that we've done this here. And I did not analyze their particular phase 2 and phase 3 requirements, but they have agritourism guidance. And it's probably worth taking a look at just in general, seeing how agritourism operators up in Washington State are complying with whatever their phase 2 requirements. They're likely not that different than ours, assuming that they're using the same science and consensus. So let's move this compliance with COVID-19 regulation into the theory of someone getting sick. Now, this, again, this sounds very far-fetched, but anyone can get sued. And so I've posed a question here, and really let's call it more of a hypothetical. But it's meant to illustrate any type of injury that could happen on a farm, and what the injured person is doing in terms of whether or not you've complied with any particular regulation that applies to your farm. Again, this one for agritourism, I'm just limiting it to COVID-19 because there aren't others that are necessarily relevant in terms of zoning and whatnot. Those don't really tie that closely to injury on farm. So here's the question. So somebody gets hurt or sick from they catch COVID-19, and they say, I went to that farm and they owed me a duty to enforce face masks and social distancing under the governor's orders. They did not enforce those rules. And as a proximate cause of that failure, I contracted COVID-19 and suffered damages. Now, it's probably very, very difficult for it'd probably be very difficult for the plaintiff to prove that they contracted COVID-19 at your farm. Because contract tracing is not an exact science. Contact tracing is not an exact science. They've been in contact with lots of different people. We don't know where it's been caught. But let's throw a what if out there. What if that public health officials have identified multiple cases that were traced back to an agritourism farm? They identify it as a super spreader site, not an official term, but you know what I mean. And it's documented somehow that through social media, people took pictures, that the farm didn't follow the governor's executive order. Employees weren't wearing face masks, or they were wearing below their nose, or they weren't social distancing, or the playground was open, or think of all the things that might be a violation. And that's where you have somewhat of a failure there on the part of the farm to take reasonable steps to keep its customers safe. And taking that a step further, what if that became the theory of negligence per se? The court, it's not outside of the realm of possibility that a court could say, okay, you're right. Multiple cases have been traced back to this farm, and we have evidence that this farm was following no safety guidelines. We're going to apply negligence per se, and it now becomes incumbent upon the farm to prove that that customer did not catch COVID-19 at that farm. Again, it sounds, I'm laughing because it sounds somewhat ridiculous even throwing this scenario out there, but logically logically under the law in terms of how liability is applied, particularly in the realm of regulation compliance failure. This is a sort of a logic model on that. So anyways, that's a little primer on relationship between liability and regulation, just using COVID-19 as a hypothetical backdrop.
Great. So obviously, Andrew made that before Governor Cooper came out with phase 2.5, which goes into effect on Friday. So those numbers of outdoor gatherings has been increased to 50 people outdoors, 25 indoors, and playgrounds are open. So at this point, I'm going to conclude our 10 minutes allocated to legal. Lee, and if you want to just move on to the next part.
Okay, thank you, Becky.
Mhm.
And again, I was failed to remind everybody what Extension does. And our role as Extension agents is to take what the research is showing to be the best practice and share that with the public so they can choose to make a decision. So when we have attorneys, again, as Becky explained, they're not providing legal advice, they're providing legal education. And that's the same thing that we're doing here. We're not trying to sell you a product, but trying to educate you on what it is our understanding or the best practices for safety. So Ben Chapman is our favorite microbiology germ guy, and he's going to talk a little bit. Dr. Ben Chapman, are you on? He's got his screen shared. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Chapman and let him talk with you about agritourism safety with COVID.
Great, thanks Lee, and thanks to Becky and Andrew kind of setting the stage from a legal standpoint. So a little bit of background on my role. So I'm a food safety extension specialist. I also conduct research in the area of food safety. But one of the things that I've had a lot of interest in for quite some time is the idea of agritourism events and risk associated with them as it relates to animal interaction as well as food events, and sort of where that interface of regulation happens. And so one of my students, who's a PhD student in this area, her name is Catherine Gensler. She's actually investigating from a research standpoint about transmission of foodborne pathogens, as well as looking at practices for COVID-19 in settings over the next little while. So she contributed to what I'm putting on the screen here, as well as one of my extension associate team members, Natalie Seymour. So here's, I guess, well, let me give you a little bit of background first. So obviously, before, let's say, February of 2020, none of us really knew much about SARS-CoV-2, the virus that leads to COVID-19. And, I follow, as someone who works on infectious diseases and the communication and extension around them, it was something that I was aware of. But I'll tell you that my entire focus as a food safety extension specialist since about March 1st has been really 95% of what I do is really about, is SARS-CoV-2 a food safety concern? And what are the risks in settings around food and agriculture? So my group, my
apologies, I couldn't hear what you said.
Well, sorry, Siri. So my group, I actually work with a lot of colleagues throughout the world on this issue who are nominally food safety people, but now have been pushed into virus, foodborne virus and respiratory virus. And so the logo that you see there at Food COVID Net is this group of individuals of us right across the U.S. So when we start thinking about agritourism settings, we heard from Andrew talking a little bit about the executive orders. And so I want to put that into practical terms for you. What does it mean? And approaching this just like we would from a food safety standpoint in a restaurant or in a food processing situation, where it's like, here are things that we have to do. How do I manage social and physical distancing? How do I practice the things that that the governor's talked about, that our local health departments are talking about? And so our groups kind of talk through this quite a bit. And it means actually effectively managing waiting in congregating areas. If we look back at our agritourism setting, there are so many different vibrant businesses that we have in the state and across the U.S. Corn mazes, pumpkin patches, farm markets and farm stands, Airbnbs, event settings, where each of these businesses really has its own challenges. So for me, number one on my list is, if I'm bringing people together, how do I effectively manage where they're going to wait? How do I keep them apart from each other? We've done research in the past on petting zoos, looking at hand washing, for instance. And I use this as an example because I think it really rings true in all agritourism settings. So we know that hand washing can effectively reduce risk of pathogens in a petting zoo situation. So what do? Well, we put up signs, right? We try to communicate that it's important to hand wash. We actually compared settings where someone was there reminding people to wash their hands or sending people to using hand sanitizer, and versus places where it was just passively posted. And it's not even close on how effective having someone there reminding people is. So for me, managing and waiting congregating areas isn't just about posting signage. It's about actively having a staff member making sure that people are away from each other, thinking through a process of how people are going to stand in line for my corn maze. Where will they go? Not you have to stand 6 feet apart, but actually providing a pathway to do that. It's very prescriptive. Next thing that I put on my list here is really standard operating procedures. So being in the food safety world, working with restaurants, grocery stores, farmers markets, food pantries, farms over the last 20 years, we often have a disconnect between, well, this is common sense and everyone should just be doing this, and reality. And reality is that we really actually need to write some sort of operating procedure on how we're going to manage things, from cleaning and sanitizing to training my employees to looking at the issues of managing and waiting. So everybody who works there, who's in this environment, knows what the rules are, what the playing field looks like. And in not just my world, but in the world of places where we're really trying to reduce risk, the only effective way to do that is to actually write these things down and then have them as a framework to train people on. So my suggestion is to actually write standard operating procedures for how your business is going to operate, how your event is going to operate. Next bullet here is really about employee health. So number one, there's no question about it. The biggest risk we have in agritourism and in all settings in the middle of this pandemic is being around other people. And so I want to screen my employees for symptoms. I want to know whether they've been exposed to someone who is positive for COVID-19, not just because I'm interested in protecting their health, though that is my first issue, but they also can be asymptomatic carriers of SARS-CoV-2. And in fact, we're learning more, as Lee said, we're learning more every day about the percentages of asymptomatic carriers. There's a term that's used quite a bit in the literature right now about super spreaders. And so essentially this is an individual who is not ill, does not have symptoms, is not wearing a face covering, is spending time close to individuals, within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes, and are a node for spreading this virus. And we've seen multiple examples of this, like literally thousands of examples since March here in the US of asymptomatic carriers. And so, yes, I want to screen my employees' health, but I also want to make sure that I provide personal protective equipment, things like masks and gloves for them, but also I want to know if they're around anybody else who is positive. And then my last bullet here for management that I want to think about is, how do I clean, sanitize, and disinfect any high-touch surfaces? So our number one risk is people to people. Transmission, I'm talking to Lee, we're close to each other, I'm 10 feet away from her and I'm yelling at her, I'm still really putting out virus particles in all of the moisture droplets. So it's not to say that there's anything magic about 6 feet. It's just we're going to manage 95 to 99% of our risk within that, outside of that 6 feet. But it's not, so I'm doing that. But now when I am talking, where does that virus go? Well, it goes on hard surfaces. It goes on my hands. It goes into our environment. And so thinking about my high touch surfaces in agritourism setting might be railings. It might be lines where people are standing, even as I'm trying to put them in lines with ropes or cords, well, gosh, their hands touching that now becomes a surface that could be transmitting the virus. And we don't really have a good sense about how big a risk it is, but it's certainly not zero. We know that the virus persists for days, not minutes, somewhere in between multiple hours and days. We know it persists less outside. We just don't know how much. So those are things that we really, really want to focus on. So I guess like tenets to think about as best practices. I, as a patron and as someone who supports agritourism from a technical standpoint in our state, I want us to be taking the health of staff and guests very, very seriously, that this is something that's happening. And just because we haven't seen a cluster linked to an agritourism setting doesn't mean that we won't. We really should be asking employees to do health screenings and asking them to screen themselves before they come, giving them a list of questions. And so I'll just read from a question that's in the chat box from Tammy Peterson that relates to this. For screening staff, the question of, have you been around someone who has tested positive? How many days should we ask back? It's really, so where CDC wants us to ask back is for 14 days, because it may take up to 10 days before I start showing symptoms after I'm infected. And the time of exposure to infection could be as great as 4 days. So that's why we have a 14-day quarantine for individuals who have been exposed to someone who's positive. I really want to know, have they been around anybody within the last 14 days? Great question, Tammy. I have a comment here about cohorting. If there's any way that I can take my staff and put them into pods, these staff members only interact with each other. They don't cross over with these staff members. They're not in close contact. That means if one of them on this pod gets sick or is positive, and even if they're not sick, but they're positive for COVID-19, then I can cohort those individuals. And I want to create a plan for limiting volume and allowing for physical distancing. We talked about that already. Cleaning and disinfecting high-touch surfaces, and then utilizing cloth face coverings and other personal protective equipment. Again, this is something that Becky and Andrew both talked about, the importance of not just that these executive orders are there from a public health standpoint. I'll just spend really a minute or so to highlight specifically animal interactions. And again, this is stuff that Catherine, my graduate student's working on. We do know that clusters are driven by person-to-person transmission. Animals, the risk of animals spreading COVID-19 to people, it's not zero. I want to be very clear on that. We don't have a zero risk situation. In fact, we've had here in our state a dog that tested positive and died from COVID-19 just recently in the last month. But it is very, very unlikely that animals are a transmission route. They're a much likelier transmission route for E. coli and Salmonella, other pathogens that we worry about. And so the risk of non-COVID-19 illness and injury from animal activities really remains the same. It's not, animals aren't really a factor. Similarly, food is not a factor. And what I want to highlight is, if you are managing your animal interactions in a safe way, there's a lot of overlapping guidance. Washing hands is important. Controlling visitor traffic to prevent overcrowding is important. We talk about this in petting zoos all the time. Providing adequate ventilation is important. But also, we don't want to create air movement that creates dust that can transmit the pathogens that we worry about that are associated with animals, plus that may be a factor in COVID-19. And then we've talked a lot about high touch surfaces. So this isn't new information. If you're already managing your animal interaction in reducing risk for your patrons, you're already doing much of what would be needed for COVID-19. Last thing I'm going to put a plug in for is a program that we developed alongside of the North Carolina Restaurant Lodging Association, Visit North Carolina, and the Department of Health and Human Services here in our state. It's called Count on Me NC. There are 5 modules that are freely available for anyone to take. They are not specific to agritourism, but there are 2 modules about cleaning, sanitizing, and disinfecting, and controlling COVID-19 in settings where people congregate that would be suitable as a starting point for you or your staff. And again, that's freely available at countonmenc.org, and you can print off a certificate that shows your completion that you can post. There's ways to get social media materials to talk about this, and if you've driven around our state at all, you'll see billboards that are about this program. There's like a $20 million marketing campaign in between now and the end of the year to highlight this. And just so you know, to give you the widespread scope of this program, we've had, I think as of yesterday, it's like 15 or 18,000 certificates, or 15,000 certificates that have been issued, representing over 6,000 businesses and events across our state. So lots of people are using it, but you know, that's where I'll leave you and turn things back over to Lee.
Dr. Chapman, Ben, thank you so much for your words. And again, I just want to stress what Ben said, because I've seen it. If you have somebody who is standing there reminding people, it is so important, and it will make such a difference. At our farmers market, the time when we finally had someone at the front door with a sign that said you must wear a mask, that was one thing. But when someone stood beside it, we saw people come, turn around, go back to their car and get the mask or pull it out of their pocket. But if nobody had been there to watch them walk in without it, it would have stayed in their pocket. Again, at our livestock shows in the past years at the county fair, families would walk in with young children and go down the line where the animals were being kept in their pens. Kids with pacifiers, babies touching. And if someone says, please make sure you go wash their hands, they're dangerous organisms that could make them really sick. And you watch them and they'll do it. But if you don't say anything, it's easy for folks to slip through. So I just encourage you to have that front person up.
And Lee, just to add to that, I know it's an uncomfortable conversation. Like
It
it's
is.
awkward, but it's a necessary one that is extremely effective.
It is. And folks are going to have a plan on how to deal with someone who is going to refuse to do that, and how you turn them around and send them back to their car, because there have been some violent confrontations, and we don't want that on anybody, but it really is very important. So we're going to have Becky talk a little bit about business decisions, but I do want to remind you, I am monitoring the chat box, and I've seen a question from Rachel and some other people. I will go back to those by the end. And if you can link to the Google document with our agenda, there are several resources there as well, including the site for Count on Me NC, where you can go and sign up and take those trainings. Short period of time, you could have all of your employees do it, and might take an hour, might take 2 hours, but it's a great way to market that you are concerned. And Ben has taught before that we have to create the perception that we are concerned about people's safety. We have to be concerned about their safety, but by showing them that we are, that creates greater confidence and makes them aware that we're paying attention. So in our ag tourism sites, we don't have that health department rating that tells the public what a good job we're doing. We have got to show them by our behaviors. Okay, so Becky, we're going to ask Becky to come up and talk a little bit about business decisions.
Okay, let me come up now. So first I want to address a question that is in the chat box. Is there any guidance on retail Christmas tree lots? So I know that yesterday, the Christmas Tree Association had a webinar where they discussed a lot of primarily labor issues associated with that. I don't think that there is any specific guidance on selling Christmas trees, but I would assume that the same sort of restrictions regarding the number of people who come onto the lot at any one particular time would apply. You would want your employees wearing masks, obviously, yeah, following all of those other guidelines that Ben gave you with respect to keeping your place clean and trying to enforce social distancing when people are on the lots. But I will introduce myself first. Lee introduced me as an attorney. I am an attorney. My name is Becky Bowen, but at NC State Extension, I do primarily community economic development. And I have seen several of you at the annual Agritourism conference. I know that right before COVID hit, we had it up in Asheville. And I had primary responsibility for the development of an agritourism curriculum that we train our agents on so that they can provide trainings to their clients. So the reason I tell you that is you are at a point in time in your business, all of you are open, you all have successful operations or have in the past, and now you're going to have to pivot. You have to make some changes. And whenever there is a change required in your business model, there are costs involved. There are all of the pre-planning costs that involve your time, where you're going to have to, for example, develop those policies that Ben was talking about. Make sure that all of your employees are trained on those policies. You also have costs associated with purchasing the PPE, the masks, the gloves, the hand sanitizing equipment. You may have additional labor costs simply because you're going to have to now monitor the number of people who are taking advantage of the various activities that you're offering on your farm. So there are costs involved. And you are going to have to put pencil to paper and decide whether or not these costs are worth taking on. Will you have enough revenue now to pay for these added costs? And the most important thing is just to sit down and figure out what those costs are. And then figure out what your revenue, your earning potential is as a result of those changes. So, so that is my major advice to you. The second thing, so you're going to have to come up with this plan, what your costs are going to be, can you make enough money to cover those costs, and then you'll want to consider a soft launch. You don't want to just say, hey everybody, our corn maze is open, come on down, if you haven't gone through a rehearsal, if you will, of having the public at your place while undergoing these changes. So I would highly recommend that once you've decided what your policies and your changes and activities are going to be, that you run a soft launch or a rehearsal, a soft opening. The other thing that I would advise is we have found from the testimonials of other agritourism operators in the state who have been operating through COVID, that people are hungry for these outdoor activities. They're hungry for something to do. So my advice to you is, if you can, take on some of the risk associated, well, maybe you're not going to have, may not make enough money to pay for these costs. I think that you will find that you probably will, because people are responding positively to these outdoor activities. And we're going to have some operators on to talk to you about their experiences. And I also want to invite Janine Parker-Woods, who is on this call, who is a specialist in marketing, on how you can encourage, make people feel good and confident that they'll be able to come to your farm and not worry necessarily about contracting COVID. So Janine, do you have any thoughts with respect to this?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I would say the key thing in your marketing is to make sure that you have some information regarding your policies as it relates to COVID-19, being preemptive with some of that information. One of the things that I've noticed is some of the folks have said, you know, hey, we're going to only have a certain number of people at the time. Of course, the number of people was different. But you want to make sure that you're communicating that you are being active in trying to make sure that they are safe and that your employees are safe. You know, as Becky mentioned, people are definitely want to be outside. They definitely want to do these things, but they also want to know that you are making sure that they are okay. And so that's actually a piece of your marketing, saying, you know, hey, we care about your health. We want to make sure that you're safe, you know, while you're participating with us. And that's actually a key component of it. If you are someone that typically sends out like newsletters and things like that, making sure that you have that information in there, making sure you have it posted to your website. If you have a website or if you use Facebook, making sure you say, you know, this is our policy as it relates to COVID-19, and really think about exactly what it is that you're gonna do. You know, during the summer, I saw some UPIC operations where they parceled off areas, and so they only had a certain number of people in certain areas at a given time. They had prepackaged stuff. So, you know, hey, if you don't feel comfortable going out, but you do want, you know, that on-farm experience, coming and maybe driving around, and then picking up and purchasing kind of, you know, prepackaged things. So there is definitely a way to your income, but letting the customers know that you care about them is a real key piece in your marketing.
Thank you, Janine. And another thing that you might consider, there's a question in the chat about what does 50 people outdoors mean? What is the gathering? Is it 50 people per acre, or do they just maintain social? What does it exactly mean? And the answer is we don't really know what it exactly means. What I would recommend is that if you have a corn maze, for example, and people have to purchase tickets to attend, if there's any way for you to sort of give them an arrival time, and then they come at the arrival time, you have no more than 50, have people go through the maze in pods of people that all already know one another and came together. And then have another place like Ben suggested, you know, where they're going to gather, and no more than 50 people in that area. So if you have different activities on your farm, the way I would read this, it's no more than 50 in those different areas. Ben, do you have any thoughts on that? Well, maybe he'll come back on in a few minutes. Anyway, again, this isn't legal advice. We're all muddling through this together, but that would be my recommendation, that, you know, you just monitor that in, you know, in any particular gathering area, you have no more than 50 people.
And just to follow up on what Becky's saying, that's going to require some additional staff.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to count who is coming in and who has left. It may require walkie-talkies, or some kind of flashcard sign so that people know you can let 2 more folks in. So keep that in mind.
Oh, also, just one more thing while it was on my mind. One of my friends, they're prepping for haunted house stuff in the upcoming month, and one of the things that they've done is they have purchased the thermometers, the head thermometers for their staff to make sure that they're checking their staff. They actually have put that out to their customer base, but you don't have to do stuff like that. But what I would suggest though is definitely being more proactive on the front end and letting your customer base know.
Right.
Becky, one other question real quickly. Someone asked earlier, the 50-person limit, does that include the employees?
It would include the employees.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move ahead. We've got several operators that have joined us today because especially in the western part of the state, we've had folks do this successfully. Leslie Sutton is on the line with us too, and she's done that in Farmville in the spring. So I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Lisa Gonzalez. She's the Extension Director in Clay County, and she's going to kind of moderate this part where we have operators talking. We did have Preston Williams from Seven Springs Farm and Vineyard scheduled to talk, but as we all know with farming, he's had an emergency come up. So I'm going to turn it over to Lisa.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. And I'll just to go back to what Janine just said, as someone with asthma, I actually just yesterday visited a business because they posted on Facebook about how, they're asking everyone to wear masks and how it's a safe place to shop. So I said, you know what, I'm gonna go there today. So I just want to confirm that type of marketing does work. So now let's go ahead and move into the panel and hear from various agritourism operators around the state about how they're operating, how they have adjusted, and how it's going. So each agritourism operator will have a few minutes to speak on how you have changed, how you've done things, what have you done differently, whether that change worked or maybe it didn't work, what surprises that you've had from this experience, and how your customers have reacted. And we'll go ahead and give everyone a few minutes and then come back with a few questions. So we'll go ahead and start with Leslie Sutton from the Home Place Strawberries and More.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Wasn't sure how to do this, but I don't know, there was a lot of challenges with trying to figure out how to navigate the strawberry season, just because it was right after COVID hit. Everybody was still kind of not knowing what to do, or all the rules and regulations. But we did a lot of pre-orders where we had people message us. We had a Facebook page and people messaged us, and we had all the orders. They could drive through, pick them up, and that worked great. Like, it honestly, we may keep that in how we operate in strawberries, even if everything goes back to normal. I don't know what the new normal will be, but we may keep that as a way or avenue for people to purchase the strawberries. We didn't do any groups or gatherings. The playground, of course, was closed, which we could tell that hindered us a little bit. And we didn't do hay rides. We did have some kids come out and want to play. So we kind of, closer to the end or beginning of summer, we tried to moderate that, where we only let a couple or like the same family or same group of people. If you came with them, then you could play with them. And that worked. Things we might do differently, I don't know yet. This fall with pumpkins is so different than strawberries. I mean, people want to pick out their pumpkin. We have a corn maze. We definitely are going to try to space out the people going through the corn maze. But, with anything, it's just a process. You got to try it and see if it works. And I'm pretty sure we'll end up changing it. So I don't really know if that answered all the questions or not.
Well, I have one follow-up question, and you mentioned that the strawberries were pickup. You had a order system and pickup. Now, did you not have any you pick? Were people
We
not
did.
allowed to pick their own? Oh, you did?
We did. And I'm not sure, I heard, you know, when strawberry season starts, it's hard to talk to other people about it, but I don't think a lot of other places let people pick. I think there was a few others around our area. But we just kind of spread them out like every other row. We sanitized the buckets after we had gloves, masks. If you wanted them, they were there. We sanitized the buckets after they used them. That was about the only way we could get semi-social distancing, I guess.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. Okay, next we're going to talk with Tammy Peterson from Hubs Farm.
Okay. Hello, everyone. There's right many on there that I know. There's some I don't know. There's some names that are showing up. I don't see faces, but anyway, I'm Tammy Peterson, and my husband and I own and operate Hubs Farm in Sampson County. We're a fifth generation working farm, and we are swine contract growers, as well as our agritourism activities. We've got farmland that we rent to a local farmer, and then once again the agritourism activities. We started the agritourism activities about 13 years ago this fall. So we have grown over the last 13 years. We diversified our income to create a way for us to be on the farm and raise the family on the farm, and we felt like we had a pretty good business model going till wow, here's the pandemic. So what my whole theory had been, and I think with agritourism, is you're bringing folks to the farm, and when this pandemic hit, you can't bring folks in groups like we had. And I was always, although we are perfectionists to a fault, my goal has always been to have a place that was safe, clean, organized. You know, that's what it was going to be. But, not a but, however, I considered it a game and a challenge to each year grow, have more and more folks. So each year it was my goal to increase the numbers that came. During the spring, the COVID pandemic basically just shut us down completely. We don't have pick your own thing crops in the spring. We do have pumpkins in the fall, but there was no pick your own. Only thing we grew was crops of fun, and they did not think that was essential in the fall. So we didn't know a way to be open in the fall and the spring. So basically shut us down. I estimated with our spring, which we've not been doing spring but a few years, we probably lost more than $100,000 in gross revenue relating to school tours and just 3 days of events. So that was a significant loss. The pandemic has affected every bit of farming. I mean, even as a contract swine grower, we're beginning to see that affect the swine industry with our revenue that we're getting. When it first started, although I shut my farm down as far as activities go, there was a need I felt to continue to stay involved with our customer base. So we continued to do social media daily, and we did some virtual events. I mean, we were doing weekday readings, book readings through Monday through Friday. So it was just that presence that we did on the internet to make sure we were, because agritourism is a people thing. It's an agriculture thing, but it's a people thing. It's an admissions ticket to learn about farming, to come out to the farm, but it's an agritainment. I mean, we focus on education and activities on the farm. We did the book readings. We sent out surveys with our email list. I was doing more social media. I mean, that was one thing that changed. I was doing more social media, even though I wouldn't have normally been open in the summer. I was still doing more social media because I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. We created drive-in movie series for the summer. I mean, we had done that for Valentine's Day in the past, but we did that in the summer. I created a few summer fun days, and it was like you said, Becky, you said, don't just jump into this all of a sudden and wham, because that first day I didn't have it like 20 people out there. I was like, oh my God, they were running to the jump pillow. I thought, how will I ever control these people? And Ben talking about you got to make them wear a face mask. Well, I reckon we all need to get our concealed carries if we're going to make these people wear face masks when they don't want to wear a face, or maybe don't need to be concealed carry. Just say, put your face mask on. I don't know. But we've got to, as agritourism farms, as people are coming to the farms, you've got to make an effort to be safe. And that is one thing. I wish more of our A&A group here, that's the Agritourism Networking Association, were here, because that's one thing we stress. I mean, you've got to be safe, you got to be organized, you just got to do that. I mean, we want people to have a great experience on the farm. Good gosh, we have enough bad publicity, so let's have a good publicity. One thing I didn't do was I normally tried to create work for my part-time people. You know, just folks that helped me. Just, you know, they weren't really employees, but they helped me. And I love having the girls from the college or wherever help. But I just felt like I couldn't afford that. I was looking for, I've looked and I continue to look for any and every opportunity that I think is an opportunity. And I twist it around to see, can I do it safely? So, I mean, you got to do that. Becky, I'm glad you said you didn't think that 25 or 50 pertained to our place, because I think you got to interpret these reading or these guidelines and these from the governor. You got to read them and you got to interpret them like you would the tax law or anything else. And then you got to make a reasonable assessment about, can I do this safely? They were put in place for you, your family, your staff, and the public safety. And can you reasonably do it? But now my business model has totally changed. I think one thing that this pandemic maybe has done for us is, you've heard the terminology of high tides float all ships. Well, anything bad things can float, good things can float, but when you lower that tide, you're going to see a lot of the inefficiencies that your business has created. And over the 13 years, I know I've got a lot of inefficiencies. So that is one thing. Instead of, you know, you look at some of these agritourism farms and you've got unbelievable amount of gross revenues coming in. It don't really matter about the gross revenues. You got to look at your gross profit percentage. So you got to think back about your business plan. You got to realize it. You know, you might have had $10,000 on this day last year, and you might not have it $2,000 this year, or you might not even have whatever, but you might actually have money in the bank. So consider that. And that has been one of the hardest things for me, is just adjusting my business model, or just my expectations down some, not down, but just reframing them in a different way. You know, think about your agritourism as a profit center on your farm. I keep it totally separate from everything else. You might not turn it into the IRS, but you need to think about it as a separate profit center and look at everything you're spending. You might not need to spend that much. I'm going to think about this as an opportunity to change your passes, your pricing, whatever, even your staffing, to make a difference on your farm. I mean, just the public's wanting to come out and they're expecting you to change something more than likely. So think about this as an opportunity to change. If you keep looking at what you did last year, you're going to worry yourself to death. Do not do it. I made some notes because, as Eileen knows, I can just keep on talking and tell you a whole lot of things. But, you know, I think everybody's plan is going to be different. It doesn't matter what one did, doesn't matter what the other one did. Everybody's plan is going to be different. You've got to interpret it, and can you do it? What are you willing to do? You might not be willing to open for a decrease in number of people. I'm going to open. I'm going to take this as a challenge to revamp my system, and my plans are to come out next year or when it better than I was last year. So learn from this, revamp some things, and move forward with a more lean way to do things. As what we've done, I've had some private parties. I sent them a COVID procedures of what we do. We got backpack, or we've got sprayer, 2-gallon sprayers that we, and we've got an announcement, an intercom thing on our farm where we can make announcements. So I plan, toddler town, I'm like, get out of there, we're going to sanitize, or I don't really do it that way. But, even if it's a token gesture, John's sitting over there, or my husband, he says, Tammy, that might not be worth a hill of beans. I said, I don't care. If Sally over there thinks it was worth it, then it was worth it. And it's got to be worth it. And that was my time limit. So that's it. That was my 10 minutes. But yeah, just embrace those changes and join associations, the ANA, the NAFMAs. Do that Count on Me thing. That was a great, do that. Engage with all the extensions and all, but it can be done, and you need to do it safely. We as farms need to be safe, and you need to make the effort to be safe, because if I'm doing it, I don't want to know Sherry down there in Moorhead is doing something, just saying, come one, come all. You don't have to wear a face mask. You don't have to do anything. If so, I'm going to go get Sherry, and I'm going to say, Sherry, don't do that. So don't be the bad egg in our industry. Make it so. Anyway, that's it.
Thank you, Tammy. So I invited Charlie Kisling from Walnut Hollow Farm here in Clay County to participate as a panelist. And unfortunately, he was not available today, but he sent me some great information about what they're doing at Walnut Hollow Farm. And Lee, do I have the ability to share? I do. Great. All right. So I'm can you see, you probably can see more than just this, but this is their website. And what Walnut Hollow Farm does is they do farm tours. They have a farm stand where they sell their beef. And they have a couple buildings where they have farm stays, as well as an RV ranch. And they've actually, in the last few months, been doing a lot of business, maybe more than usual, because people are wanting to rent RVs. And that's, a lot of people are choosing their summer vacations in a RV instead of staying at a hotel. And so he's actually done some excellent business this year. At first, the beef sales slowed down, but as many farmers have learned that, the farm to consumer, whether it's at farmers markets or at a farm stand, more people are buying direct from the farmer. That has increased not just in North Carolina, but around the country. So we had a slow period, but eventually, it picked back up. So I just want to show one thing on this website, because I thought it was a great example. He has, amenities, cost, etc. But at the end, he has his liability statements right there on the website. That you're assuming your own risk for coming here. There's inherent risk of exposure to COVID-19. And then also, do not enter the property if you have a fever, if you've been exposed to COVID, if you have symptoms. And he has this on a sign I'll show you in a moment all over the farm. So nobody can say they didn't know what the rules are. It's on the website and it's on signage around the farm. He also has the NC Agritourism limited liability law. If you don't know, you can order those signs from the North Carolina Department of Agriculture. I think they're only about $20 and have them posted on your farm. Let's see, I'm going to share a different document now. I do want to share this really cool poster that he created. There we go. I don't know if you're seeing everything on my screen or just the poster, but he's, here he has this cow with a mask on. I think that's really cute. I thought that was really nice. And then just the request that he has for his customers, social distancing, one person in the farm store at a time, which is an open air location, face coverings required in the farm store. They have adapted some things. They now do website pre-ordering for all the beef products in the farm store, as well as for tours. All of the lodging, whether it's an RV or a farm stay, is done in advance, and it is cash contactless payments. So whether it's buying beef from the farm store, it's an invoice that is done online, as well as, same with the payment. So there's no cash handling or checks. It's all done online. They are monitoring staff temperatures, hand washing. And Charlie and Walnut Holler Farm actually had a reputation for being exceptionally clean for an Airbnb place or farm stay. So they've just, having that reputation as being really clean has really helped. And some ways that they've changed for the farm stays is, for example, that they don't do back-to-back bookings. So there's a 24-hour period between bookings in the barn or wherever you're staying so that they can clean. And they advertise that they're doing really extensive cleaning. They also, another thing that they've changed is they're no longer doing any kind of groups. So small groups, like I like the way Leslie said, if you came together, you can play together. So families can do tours together. All tours are private, but they're not grouping random strangers together for tours. So it has to be within your COVID pod, as they say. They did have some shared spaces that were available in some of the farm buildings where they rented out, but they're not using those spaces anymore. So it's all just private rooms and no group or shared spaces. And so, yeah, so that's all I wanted to say about that. Unfortunately, Charlie couldn't join the call today, but farm stays are possible. It just may require a little bit more cleaning, a little bit more space in between, customers, and just following the rules. And one thing that Charlie does nicely is post those rules through signage, through, the reservation email system, and on the website. So farm stays are possible. You just have to really clean well, and like Janine said, market what you're doing and how you're cleaning, because a lot of people like me that are higher risk, we really care about those things. So next we're gonna move on to Shaka Alpaca Farm, and Matt, I'm probably not gonna say your last name right, but is it Reschke? Did I say that?
You got it exactly right.
I got it. Okay.
You're good, Lisa. Thanks for the introduction. COVID has affected us a little bit. We're rookies. We're new to this agritourism business. I want to tell you, we were up and running maybe 90 days, open to the public last fall, holiday time frame. And then, March rolled around and we shut it all down like everyone. So we don't have a history of numbers to look back on and see how it's affected us financially. We don't have that history, but we're a small operation here. We do the farm tour and alpaca treks. We're certainly not as big as Tammy and John, our friends out there at Hubs, but we're smaller, so we naturally have smaller groups. One thing we have done, a modification to our business model, is we used to just have farm tours available, and you pick your day and pick your time, and we'd group you with someone else. Of course, we don't do that anymore. Like you mentioned, we're doing small family groups only. So once someone picks a time, say Saturday at 2, we get their reservation, we lock it down. We don't put anyone else in that time frame. We've added, of course, hand sanitizers throughout the property. Signs are up. Phase 2, the numbers are not going to affect us because we're still doing small groups. But as Becky mentioned earlier and Ms. Woods mentioned, outdoor activities are very hot right now. They're booming. And we get a lot of our visitors from people staying at cabins down in Blue Ridge, Georgia, and around the local area of Murphy. We're out here in Western Carolina, almost to the Tennessee line. So there's a lot of cabins here and a lot of people that are just Googling things to do. So we pop up and they come and see us. The scary aspect of that is most of the people, not most, 90% of our guests we've mentioned are from Florida. So right there, South Miami, I had guests from Miami earlier today. But we as hosts, we wear our mask and we greet them in the parking lot. And as soon as they see us getting ready, they see us putting on our mask, they put on their mask. We're 6 foot apart throughout the tour. We do the alpaca trek. We say stay 1 alpaca apart, which is 6 foot. So that's how we are complying and that's how we're running our business. And business is booming, business is good. I hope the rest of my friends out there enjoy that when they do reopen. And I just want to say stay safe, everyone.
So Matt, I actually have a specific question for you. We recently did an agritourism program for extension agents, and we were talking about marketing. And I mentioned that you all used Airbnb experiences for a lot of your promotion, but we also discussed how that was shut down for a while. So how did you pivot and change how you marketed?
That's correct. Actually, at the February meeting, the agritourism meeting in Asheville, I mentioned that and I was promoting it because it was doing extremely well. We're getting a lot of our business from Airbnb experiences, not the accommodation Airbnb, but they have a thing called experiences. And we were doing well. We're getting most of our referrals from them. They did shut it down, and as of today, they're not reopened. So we've gone it alone without them. They are going to reopen here in a couple of weeks, I think September 11th. In that time frame, they will reopen, and our calendar is already open past that, and we're getting bookings through them. They're very conservative on reopening worldwide. They have training modules online, just like the Count on Me NC, and we've done that. So we've gone it alone. We stood up our webpage a little different. We started taking reservations over our webpage and our own telephone and handling our own bookings. But yeah, we've gone it alone without them the whole past 90 days.
Thank you. All right. So I have a question for any panelist that wants to answer. I'm curious about how your customers have reacted. Are they appreciative that you're still open? Are they appreciative that you're social distancing and wearing masks, or have you gotten complaints? Does anyone have any feedback from your customers that you would like to share?
I will add, our guests are very relieved that we're open. When they come here and experience our farm, they say this is exactly what we were looking for. Our own family, just us, outdoors, 6 foot apart. Some of them were complaining that they wanted to do the rafting that is local to us in Western Carolina here, and they're putting 20, 30 people in a raft, no mask, no distancing, and they can't understand it. So they were glad there was an alternative for their vacation.
Mm-hmm. The times we've opened for the private parties or whatever, even the survey we did, folks were very anxious for us to open and find a way for them to come out. And there's both sides of the spectrum. I mean, you know, some are very for mask and some are not for mask. But I plan to make announcements throughout as far as what our requirements are.
Yeah, and I know with extension, we're following the CDC guidelines, and if someone wants to come into the extension office, they need to wear a mask. However, we'll accommodate people that don't want to wear a mask, just we'll meet them outside, or we'll have a Zoom or a phone call. So there are ways to meet the needs of people that maybe can't wear a mask for a medical reason. But again, just communicating that up front is important. Any other comments on customer reactions? Okay, Tammy, while you're up on the screen, I had a question for you. You mentioned doing things virtual. Did you charge for those virtual events?
No, I did not. However, we did consider it, and I attended some virtual field trips that were held there. There's a virtual field trip platform. I'm not sure where I think it's Dairy Farms. I know Patterson Farms have started doing some virtual field trips. A lot of farms are considering doing the virtual field trips and delivering the pumpkin and the products and the things to the school. I considered that, but I've not developed anything with that yet. I know I've not really had a teacher that really wanted to talk to me about a pumpkin yet. I mean, the teachers are so stretched with the things that they're doing. So yeah, I think the virtual field trips, I'm still wondering about theirs. But Michelle Patterson, if you visit their website, you'll see that she does have a virtual field trip up there.
Great. And I know there was an example of a farm that was, you could pay to have a goat or an alpaca join a Zoom meeting, you know, $40 for a 10-minute appearance. So
Yeah.
there.
Lee Rankin at Apple Hill did that, and I think Alma Galloway at Maze Craze did that, and they did do some of them. So
Great. So I think now we'll open up to questions from anybody. You can put your questions in the chat. Katie asked about a question, or you can take yourself off mute and ask.
I do want to mention that Andrew Brannon has now joined us. So if you have any questions regarding liability, you have the expert in the house.
Hey, my name is Katie Tucker, and we are with Kalawi Farm in Eagle Springs, which is in Moore County. And I just have a question in general for everybody. We're trying to plan for our corn maze and pumpkin patch. So a few things. First of all, I wanted to be sure I understood correctly from the governor's announcement yesterday that playgrounds can open as starting, I think, Friday at 5.
Yes, that is what is in his announcement.
Okay, so like we've got a playground area, like big pirate ship, a super slide, and a jump pillow. So do all of those things fall under that category?
I would read that and interpret that. Now, Annie Baggett sent something as it relates to public playgrounds. I never have considered myself a public playground.
Yeah, we have this.
I am going to sanitize the activities that I have. And I think that's another thing. When you talk about your farm and your activities, don't refer to them as a playground. I just don't.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think the word agritourism, we need to, as farms, refer to ourselves as working farms with agritourism activities. That agritourism farm, for so long, the industry has got us as they're thinking agritourism is spelled CORNMAZE or giant slide or something like that. So we're working hard to get that. So I would just forget about playgrounds. You got activities on your farms and you're going to sanitize them.
Okay.
Yeah,
And then, like I've already had a couple of homeschool groups wanting to sign up to come out, which is fine, I guess, as long as they're not more than 50 of them. I mean, how are we going to look at that 50 number on a large spread out farm and corn maze deal?
Well, that's what we were, mulling over earlier, is that I look at this, and Andrew, you can chime in, and Ben, what your thoughts are, but it's sort of like each gathering area. So you have a corn maze, you have your bouncy park, you have your parking lot, you have your farm store, and outside each of those areas could be considered, and I look to you, Andrew and Ben, to get some feedback on this, but that could be considered a separate gathering area. And we're talking about managing people in those outdoor areas. What are your
Okay.
thoughts?
I think that's a good, I mean, I don't disagree with Becky. I mean, there is no more fine-tuned guidance on that. I think at the end of the day, as long as the interpretation that you're making of it is reasonable, and you're making a good, because again, that's the word we always use in law, is reasonable. So if your interpretation of it and you're doing your best efforts to follow the spirit of the regulation, then sure, I think what Becky's outlined is probably okay.
Katie, are you on our A&A? Are you a member of our A&A?
Yes, me and my sister-in-law, Maria Williams. I think you've communicated with her.
Okay.
She's my sister-in-law.
Okay. On the A&A page, I posted is from the Ohio State Extension.
Right.
And Rob Leeds and them, I don't know if you looked at that, but they created guidance. If you are one of these that need a number, as far as the capacity, I was just going to plug it in. I was going to plug it in to see what I came up with. But I think you can reasonably determine whatever you can reasonably manage. And you're
Yes, we were thinking of doing like 2-hour time slots and then having people sign up for time slots. I mean, I know that's a lot of like organization on my end of things, but I just don't want it to get chaotic and out of hand out there. So I was thinking of doing X amount of people per 2 hours.
We're going to do wristbands, and we're going to start at 10 o'clock, and I might do
that's
it
what we
every
were gonna
30
do
minutes. And they're going to do a different color wristband.
That's what we're planning on doing.
They're going to have 4 hours, and then I'm going to announce at 2 o'clock, red,
Right.
it's time for you to leave.
Okay, and so my last question, I'm sorry I'm taking so much time up, is about masks. You know, one of the homeschool moms that's, you know, planning to come has already asked. She said, we don't have to wear masks there, do we? Because it is an outdoor activity. So my response should be, yes, you have to wear a mask, but if they arrive and refuse to wear a mask, what's the best way to handle that, I guess, is my...
You could have masks for them to wear.
Unless they refuse to wear a mask.
Well, I feel like, and I would, Andrew and Ben, I feel like on the acreage that we've got ample space for social bubbles to social distance.
Okay.
I'm going to require a mask on the hayride, but I'm still going to separate them 6 foot from social bubbles. I'm going to require a mask on the barrel train.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do the corn crib. And I don't think I'm going to do the mini zip line just because but I'm going to require my staff to wear face masks, especially when they're, you know.
Yeah, we are too. Our staff has to wear a mask, yes.
And if I could just jump in, I would say that fundamentally that's the first thing. That's the thing you can control. And I make an argument the other day. I made an argument that it's a requirement, and you want to make sure that that's where you're being regulated. First and foremost is with your employees, and you can actually have control of that. And I think with the outdoors and the groups, that's such a tough issue, and I don't know the answer to it. But again, is what you just outlined in terms of still doing the social distancing is good. And by and large, you're keeping groups within groups. And it sounds like you're keeping different groups of people separated from each other. And as long as you're actively doing that, again, I think you're doing a good job of it. So I don't think so.
I also think you need to be careful in whatever you say you're doing, you need to do. I mean, if you put on there, you're going to require face masks, then.
So Rachel has raised, has a question, I believe. I see here she has raised her hand on Zoom.
Yes, and before Rachel starts, let me break in real quick. It is 4:30, and There are many of us that are able to stay online to try to answer questions, but for folks that cannot, this was our time block, and we do have Zoom air until 5. I will be sending out an evaluation, and I will try to also include the agenda that has links to other resources that would be helpful. So please respond to that. It'd be so helpful. But I'm going to go on back and thank you again for joining us, those that have to leave. And we'll go to Rachel.
Hey, Miss Guth, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I was wanting to find out, I know a lot of people have said the 50-person max place to place across the farm. I understand that, but I would like clarification on that. Like, I don't want to just go say like, well, Tammy said we could have 50 people here, or, you know, we could have 50 people there. If the law shows up and wants to know what our, you know, what we were allowed to have, is there a way that we can get some clarification on that, like clarification in writing and stuff?
Yeah, you know, one of the questions on that thing for the panelists was what has been surprising. I guess the most surprising for me has been the inconsistency and lack of guidance that we've received from throughout the country, the state, and those counties. And every county, every state's doing something different. I think you've got to reasonably assess what you're doing. And I don't think you can expect to get anything in writing, because nobody's not wanting to do it.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I guess I just wanted
The
to.
safe way is to only have 50 people on your property at a time.
Yeah, I mean, if that's what you're comfortable doing, you do what you're comfortable doing and what you feel like you can manage.
Okay.
Yeah, and let me just jump in on your comment there, Tammy. I think this is something that I've experienced in the food world quite a bit. It is local health department to local health department interpretation of somewhat vague executive orders and rules, and this is something that we experience all the time when it comes to the food code, and magnified by a situation where the science is kind of evolving daily, and so is the guidance.
Isn't that weird?
And so I hear this issue more than any other issue, and I don't think that there's a solution to it. I think it, you know, as Andrew and Becky have kind of highlighted, you want to be reasonable, but it is up to interpretation, and a local law enforcement officer who's responsible for this can interpret this differently than someone next door, and there's no real way to handle that other than it's vague and it's evolving so fast all the time that I'll give you a very clear example just that came up earlier. This 50 pods of people at different gathering spots in an agritourism setting. I guarantee you that DHHS and the Secretary's office and the governor did not think about that. Like when talking about 50 or 25 or 10, right? And it's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's that they're trying to look at this in all settings. And I know that, that pumpkin patches and corn mazes weren't at the top of their mind in that decision making. So I don't expect them to have any clear guidance. But I think for me, and this is how we've handled it with restaurant settings, if there's a question, contact the local authority to find out how they're going to interpret it, because they're ultimately the ones who are going to enforce it. And in some cases, that's a health department, and in some cases, that's a sheriff's office, and that's up to us as the business to manage, which is a terrible situation to be in, but that's kind of where we're at.
Thanks, Ben. Rachel, you've still got your hand up. Do you have a follow-up question?
No, ma'am.
Okay, great. And we can talk some more. I'd encourage folks to, contact any of the speakers or your local extension agent if you need some follow-up with that. Andrew, did you have a comment on that as well?
No, I agree with Ben. I mean, it's because I was going in my head, it's like, well, who's going to show up at your farm, and they're going to show up under what authority? Like the state highway trooper, I would say probably doesn't have any interest or authority to do something, but it'd be the health department, maybe sending somebody out. But I agree, calling up the deputy sheriff's or the sheriff's office and say, hey, what are y'all doing about this?
Well,
in the county.
And Andrew, I can speak from Pitt County. We've had a couple of situations. We did have a local trampoline park that opened against the order, and the sheriff, people complained, and the sheriff made several visits and had to threaten to take official action if they did not comply. I can also tell you that at least in our county, we have a COVID hotline through the health department. So the public can make complaints or call and ask questions, and the health department gets 35 some calls a day. And it seems to go in waves. It may be questions about a certain business or a restaurant, or that people will call in and say, they're not wearing masks, they're not taking precautions. And then there may be a point where the health department needs to go out and have a conversation with that business owner. And my thought would be, Rachel, is that as all the other people have said, do your very best to follow the spirit of the law, to show that you're taking it seriously, to follow safety regulations. And I feel like if you're doing those things, that it will be less likely that somebody's going to call and say, they're doing something wrong. Raleigh's is all messed up. If you're following the letter of the law, the spirit of the law.
Lee?
Yes.
Can you hear me? This is Diana.
Yes, you had a question.
I appreciate your summary there, and I do agree with Tammy. And I will have to say, from working in the corporate world for many years, sometimes you don't want the specifics, because it may not be something we want to hear, right? It may not be something we want to do. And I do think, to your point, that perception, and obviously the caring of, but that we are moving and changing our business to really follow rules, trying to be aware of all this and interpreting the best that we can, is the best way to go forward. Because, I've got a large acreage farm of Christmas trees, and that was the reason for my question. Is it 50 per acre? Is it 50? So I like that, being able to interpret it, because we are going to obviously put limits on people coming in, but having some of that guidance is going to be really helpful. So I would really like to not have a very specific. I'd like to keep it in that business owners trying to do the best interest for everyone, as far as the business as well as for the public that are coming in. So that's just my 2 cents. But I don't know if the legal team here agrees with that, but I think the more we push on specifics, the worse it possibly can be for us.
And that's an interesting viewpoint, because you don't want somebody just to come out and on a whim say, nah, I'm gonna tell you you shouldn't operate or whatnot. Remember, at the end of the day, and again, I'm just putting the lawyer hat on with liability. I don't know. I don't know if I have an answer for it. So.
One in Washington State, where they came out and said that the agritourism activities were not allowed on the farm except for the maize or the pumpkin patch. I know a lot of the farmers, or some of the farmers that went back to the governor's office and explained to them really how a farm works during the fall, and they reversed that, or for lack of a better word, reversed. I don't know if it was law, but they went back and changed that. So I think Ben is right that a lot of times, this happened and they had to start generating things and just to get the public safe. So I doubt they thought about a farm and a pumpkin patch and a hayride because they knew we were all responsible people and we'd look after it.
Who else has questions for us?
I just wanted to comment on the previous discussion, and I think you're at biggest risk for enforcement if you have a spread at your farm. So I think, following the guidelines and being smart about it, doing everything you can to reduce the risk, I think is really a great place to start.
I agree, Lisa. And I think one thing that was covered with the Christmas tree program yesterday, and you can find in guidance for farm workers through extension sites, are how to manage your staff. So I'm thinking about the folks that I know the best here in Pitt County. Quite often it's your family that's running the operation. And so if you don't have anybody outside of your family, and your daughter gets sick from school and it's going to impact everybody that lives in the house with her, who's going to run this operation? So really being strategic and thinking about, okay, I'm going to have an A team and I'm going to have a B team, and they're not going to cross. If two people can't show up from this team, how are you going to handle that? But you don't want to knock yourself out of business because everybody who works has gotten sick or quarantined. So it's a real important piece to think about.
I had not really put much thought into my staff cohorting away from each other. That is something, if they come up, one gets it. I'm gonna call you Sherry. Come run hubs. Or Jackie, where's she at?
It is an important thing to think about, is how would you handle that?
I can speak from experience working with 4 restaurants in the last 3 months that have gone through this, and 2 of them cohorted their staff and closed for a day, did cleaning and disinfection. 2 of them did not and had no one to work for. It ended up being they ended up hiring and scraping by, but everyone who was in close contact in these both small restaurants were defined as being exposed to this positive case and were on quarantine for 14 days. So they were on quarantine trying to manage reopening. So I really, I don't think there's any perfect ways to do this, but thinking about, okay, how can we cross over, especially in a larger type agritourism setting where some staff may only be doing certain roles. Let's just define it so they will never be in close contact so we don't run into this. But it is, it's a real situation. I think with agritourism, so much is seasonal that taking 2 weeks worth of revenue away is it's unthinkable. I totally agree, Tammy, and can't stress that enough, that this isn't a theoretical. I've lived through it with a couple of restaurants in our state.
And the other thing we haven't talked about is keeping track so that you could trace. So if, how are you going to be keeping track of your customers so that, Tammy, you're the face of your business and you get sick and you worked Friday, Saturday, and Sunday? The health department is going to ask you who you came in contact with. And you need to have some way of keeping track of your customers.
I guess that because we've not been exposed to anyone with COVID that we know of. But I guess if a staff member gets, and being used to it. So if a staff member gets COVID, that health department knows that staff member works at Hub's Farm. So they're going to call, they're going to say, who have you been in contact with? And they're going to say, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. It might be my whole staff. You need to quarantine for 14 days.
Yep. Yeah. And I guess this is where we have to define contact and close contact. So CDC defines close contact as within 6 feet for greater than 15 minutes. Now, that's not 15 minutes at one time. That's 15 minutes cumulative time in the period of exposure or in the period of shedding the virus. And that's 2 days prior to symptoms being displayed. But in some cases with asymptomatic individuals, it's 2 days before they tested positive for it. It really is kind of all, not all over the place, but there's different interpretations of it. But absolutely, so I think about 2 staff members that have roles that have them being in close contact over a 2-day period for more than 15 minutes. One of them tests positive. The other one it'll be suggested strongly by the health department that this person goes into quarantine for 14 days.
So it's 15 minutes for the 2 days.
Yeah, in that period of exposure, period of
it can
shedding.
Be 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, and 5 minutes sometime over a period of 48 hours.
Yep. Yeah. And that's the, and how this works and why, why health departments and contact tracers are becoming so overstretched in this is they're going to go through, okay, tell me all the people that you might have worked with. What was your role? How much time did you spend with each other? And then we're trying to work backwards from those thresholds, from that. And so it might be, Lee's example, Tammy, if you're there, you're working, but you're practicing social distancing with all your patrons. You're wearing a face covering, they're wearing a face covering. You're not in close contact. It might not be necessary to do any sort of contact tracing with those patrons. But if you're in a situation where that's not possible, and I'll give you a real example. I went to a business today that no one was wearing face masks who worked there. I had to go pick something up. I'm wearing a mask. I'm standing in line, but they're talking with someone else who's another customer. And it was 10 minutes. There's a point here where we're in maybe close contact time, not me, but this other person. And they're not keeping track of what's happening, but that's the type of questions that the health department are going to ask you about. So truthfully, most of these clusters pop up in the ones that we've seen with staff that are working together, that are there over and over, hours on end, even wearing face coverings. They're not magic. They are reducing the risk, but the close contact is if I'm close to someone for more than 15 minutes in this period of exposure.
And Tammy, this is Lee. Teenage help, great thing for the fall season. Think about our teenage assistants. You trust them, your family, friends, they're good kids. But when they leave your farm, where are they going?
Oh, yeah.
Whose sister's boyfriend has been at the university at a party, not wearing a mask, kissed his girlfriend, and now it's in your house. So, I think one of the things I've thought about is that sometimes we still have this misconception that it's only certain people that have this. They look clean, I know who they are, those kinds of things. And it's not so. It's creeping up closer to all of us, and just need to be eyes wide open.
And on the super spreader events that I mentioned earlier, many of them occur pre-symptoms. So it's in those 2 or 3 days prior to someone actually experiencing the illness. And so it's like Lee said, everybody looks fine, feels fine. That's really it appears to be our riskiest time, which is literally impossible to to plan for, right? How do I fast forward in time and figure out if someone's going to get symptoms? I gotta assume that everyone is an asymptomatic carrier, and I gotta deal with that in a manageable way.
So folks, I do see that it's 10 till 5 and we have lost a few folks. Are there any other questions? Ben is with us still. I know several other of our talented group here have had to leave for their next event. Any other questions?
Ben, from what you're seeing, what are your thoughts about the spring of 2021?
I'm really not overly optimistic. You know, not to be the bearer of bad news. I think that what we had expected to see this summer was a downward trend in daily cases and infection rates, and we didn't see that. And what I'm nervous about is we expect cases very drastically to go up this fall. And I don't know what's going to happen, right? And so the spring is almost too far in advance for me to even have any level of optimism. I really do. I do feel that if all the chips fall into place and there's a vaccine that's effective and it gives some long-term protection, and these are both ifs. I don't think we have that on our right here now. And we can distribute that vaccine across our communities, then maybe 18 months from now, we're in a good spot. And that's, you know, that's my best guess right now. So, but there's still a lot of ifs that have to break into place. I mean, we just saw, we've now seen multiple cases of people being reinfected, confirmed, right? So what that tells us is any antibody protection that someone has, which is what we're trying to generate with a vaccine, may not last very long. So like seasonal influenza, we're not just getting to a vaccine and everything's good. We got to adjust this vaccine yearly. And then we still got to make sure that we've got coverage. So I don't know. I'm sorry to be the super negative and dark person on this, but I don't know. I don't know.
We count on you for this, Ben.
And I mean, I guess the good news is we have lots of practices that we can put in place to reduce the risk of transmission. And I feel like we're slowly coming around to understanding that. Like mask, face covering wearing is in the 90% now, right? Where 6 weeks ago, it was like 60%. And 6 weeks before that, it was like 15%. So it's slowly moving, and that's all helping. Now there's so much in the community that we've missed some of our chances, but we do have ways to reduce our risk, both business and public health risks.
Okay, folks, I'm going to close us down unless there are other questions. I do appreciate everyone's participation today, and be looking for a follow-up email that will have an evaluation that's really helpful to us, and the resources and agenda and contact information. I do appreciate everyone. Thanks for being part of it today, and send your questions. We'll try to help.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Ben.